Greetings, and thank you for the opportunity that I can present my research about communicative action. My name is Jo-Ann Monsels. I am a sociologist working at Monsels Consultancy. This study addresses the gap between efforts to deliver general urban education and the real needs of minorities for education in rural areas. In the case study for Coroni, I have researched the possibility of digital storytelling for cultural preservation, the link between history education and the livelihood of students in Coroni. The presentation structure goes as follows. I will start with an introduction, research objective, theoretical framework, methodology, results, conclusions, and I will end with the recommendation. Coroni is a northern district of Suriname which lies in South America. Prior research has shown that coconut cultivation was a food crop in Coroni between 1820 and 1873. Starting from 1873, the slave population in Coroni got the opportunity to work as free people. And they played a major role in transforming this food crop of coconut cultivation into a cash crop. This study will look into control mechanisms of money and power and the influence it has on natural selection in the life world between 1939 and 1999. It will also look in control mechanism of power and how this control mechanism of power influenced the educational system in the system world between 1939 and 1999. A pattern of natural selection was found when it comes to urbanization for further studies. Women, younger children in households, and students with higher grades partake more in urbanization. Hence, several tables in my research show a smaller population of women in Coroni than men. The second table shows that the highest formal education in Coroni is junior secondary level. This increases the need among students to leave for further studies on a young age. The central question in this research is how can digital storytelling connect the learning content of history education in Coroni to the coconut life world of the students in Coroni? And the sub-questions are, how were values in the coconut farmers' life world transferred between 1939 and 1999? How did the education system contribute to the colonization of the life world of coconut farmers between 1939 and 1999? What challenges are there for teachers to apply digital storytelling when transferring intangible heritage in Coroni? And what opportunities are there for teachers to contribute to the preservation of intangible heritage in Coroni through digital storytelling? The research objectives are mapping colonization of the livelihood of coconut farmers and research regarding the educational intervention of digital storytelling for cultural preservation. This research is socially relevant because it supports education with learning contents that focus on the livelihood of students. In addition, there's also a policy relevance because specific measures must be taken to match education in Coroni to strengthen the agriculture community in that area and also to empower that community. The academic relevance is linking the digital storytelling to rural democratization processes. The digital storytelling gives a voice to the local community to share their view of life. The life world, as Habermas describes it, consists of a private sphere and a public sphere. And the system world consists of a sphere of economy and a sphere of state. And because there is an unbalanced interaction between the life world and the system world, there occurs colonization of the life world More precisely, because the reproduction of the live world is less than the reproduction of the system world, there is colonization of the live world. For this study, I have looked into how the education system is colonizing the live world of the coconut farmers. The concepts in this study are digital storytelling, mutual understanding, consensus, and cultural preservation. According to Lundby and Robin, digital storytelling ranges from personal stories until documentaries about historical events. According to Bowden, his digital storytelling is an expression of digital literacy. Coconut farmers in Koroni don't question their common knowledge. Only the application of the common knowledge is discussed. Common knowledge is accepted as valid. So it's mandatory for intersubjective interactions. When it comes to consensus, you could say that communicative action would be achieved through a process of consensus regarding truth, sincerity, and legitimacy. Dogon and Robin highlight the way how digital storytelling needs to be provided to the student in a personal manner in order to contribute to the cultural preservation and also in order to contribute to better learning performance. The involvement of the student in the educational process will increase with the constructive approach of digital storytelling. With the constructive approach, the social context is taken into account and the student is guided into self-learning. In this study, digital storytelling are the teaching methods for history lessons in the school context. Mutual understanding, that's the agreement between coconut farmers on transfer of values around school, means of support, barter, and mobility in the coconut life world. Consensus, that's the shared view of the coconut farmers on dialogue of agriculture in the school context and dialogue of livelihoods in the home context. Cultural preservation, that is the preservation of values in the coconut life world through creativity and reflection during the digital storytelling teaching methods. This brings us to the conceptual model. In the conceptual model, you can see that for digital storytelling, I have looked into creativity and reflection. For mutual understanding, I have looked at values. For consensus, I have looked at learning content and idle speech situation. And for cultural preservation, I have looked at identity formation. The data gathering was done with a qualitative data collection with triangulation. For the private sphere of the life world, I have interviewed coconut farmers through snowball sampling. For the public sphere of the life world, I have interviewed key figures and I have also done document analysis of poems. For the system world, I have done interviews and participative observations at secondary schools in Koroni. And because the ICT level of the Tatakolin school was very applicable for this research, I have chosen to also do a 1 week participative observation at this school to look more in depth into my concepts. Here I have chosen a cluster sample at, for the third grade and I've done a focus group with these students. For the teacher's experience, I have chosen 3 participants of the basic ICT training. I have chosen the ICT employee of the school and I have also chosen the history teachers of the school. During the data analysis, I have done verbatim transcripts, I have done open coding of text fragments, And I've also done Excel coding of to study the patterns of colonization of the life world and the use of digital storytelling within my case study. For the presentation of the results, I will make use of the interaction between the life world and the system world. The consummate role is an interaction between the private sphere of the life world and the economy in the system world. In the consummate role, the steering mechanism is money. So when we apply this consummate role to Coroni and to more precisely the livelihood of the coconut farmers, we can see that the coconut products are largely sold to consumers who are not living in Coroni. So most of the time when the coconut farmers are using the coconut products, it has to do with um, borders or with people who are borrowing from one another, but not as much people who are buying from one another. Another pattern that was found is that the monetarization is a compensation for the colonization in the life growth. But when it comes to the coconut farmers, they experience insufficient transparency with regard to subsidies. And one reason for this is that the subsidies are given through coconut factories in Coroni. So they are not given directly to the coconut farmers who could operate like entrepreneurs, but they are given to factories where coconut farmers are working as entrepreneurs with the coconut factories. So the coconut farmers have not experienced a lot of transparency when it comes to subsidies for the coconut cultivation. When we look at the employee role, there is an interaction between the private sphere of the life world and the economy in the system world. We can see that the coconut farmers experience that it is the government whom is providing employment. Although they are working as entrepreneurs, they still believe that the government is the one who is um, supplying employment. They also look to the government when it comes to access for social security like pensions because they don't have a social security system in their life world that has to do with money. They do have a social security system that has to do with family members and um, reliability on family members. But when it comes to money, they lack a good social security. And due to the lack of the social security, they also experience diminished confidence in the coconut cultivation because when they get older, they don't have the security that can continue to provide for them as an entrepreneur when they can no longer work in the coconut sector. The employee status of the coconut farmers affects their land rental status and therefore also their income. This is the case. The em- the entrepreneurs, so the coconut farmers, they look to the government for employment. But of course, coconut trees need to be planted in on ground, on land, in gardens, and somehow they don't trust the government enough to provide for the land. So when it comes to the land rental, they are the rental is among yourselves and it is within families. But this type of rental and making agreements in families affects their income because they can only make agreements for a certain piece of land, which is not a big piece of land, and this directly um, has influence on the income of this coconut farmer. The coconut farmers are in a situation where they are supplying raw materials to the government. And if you look at the situation between 1939 and 1999, you could see that the coconut farmers had a constant role of supplying raw materials to the government. The citizen role is an interaction between the public sphere of the life world and the state of the system world. Um, for the citizen role, the uh, steering majorism is power. Okay, when it comes to the citizen role in Coroni, you see that the farmers, the coconut farmers, um, perceive the government as the one whom should supply employment within Coroni. Although they are entrepreneurs, they are still voting so the government can supply employment within Coroni. And if you look at the statistics, then you see that 60% of employment within Coroni is provided by the government. The problem is that most of the employment opportunities that the government supplies are administrative jobs and they are linked to the educational system. They are linked to diplomas. While the um, coconut farmers hope for employment opportunities within the coconut cultivation, but these employment opportunities are not provided um, as much as they are hoping for. In the client role, there is a interaction between the state and the public where the coconut farmers are depending on the government to provide agricultural training, to provide growth within the coconut industry, and even for the coconut nursery, which means for processing of plants. So they have a really dependent role towards the government um, when it comes to the client role. To describe the current use of digital storytelling within the educational sector in Coroni, I have made a SWOT analysis. The strength is that the teachers use mostly convergent teaching methods in digital storytelling at school. So they are aiming to pull all the students in the classroom towards a certain level of ICT and a certain level of comprehension of the course. The weakness is that there is insufficient divergent digital storytelling when it comes to the teaching methods for cultural preservation, which means that the teachers are not paying enough attention to the differences between the students. They pay a lot of attention to converging all the students to a certain level, but they don't make enough use, for example, of the differences between the life world, life world of the students and the life world of the teachers. Most of the teachers are not from Koroni. So instead of using this life world as a resource to tap from for their divergent digital storytelling teaching methods, they are not paying a lot of attention to the divergent digital storytelling methods. They are not paying a lot of attention either to agriculture in school. Although it is an agriculture community, agriculture is not a topic that is often used in school. They pay a lot of attention on the general education that is required in the whole country, and they are not paying attention to the things that are very important in the life world of the students. What happens is that you have a diminishing of the cultural reproduction in order to achieve mutual understanding and also consensus of coconut cultivation within households. So, this means that when you look at the poems and also at the interviews, they perceive the coconut cultivation as inferior to the school system. They don't perceive the coconut cultivation and the coconut life world as a resource where you can tap from for the school system. They see it as if the school system needs to deliver you from the hard work from the coconut cultivation. This means that when students have obtained a certain diploma, they do not want to work in the coconut cultivation anymore because they feel like they are delivered. That's the way how it is perceived within this school system. And especially because the school system is not taking the agriculture into account during the courses and during the digital storytelling, this feeling of feeling inferior is increasing. When looking at the current digital storytelling teaching methods in Koroni, there are also some opportunities. The current digital storytelling methods are highlighting the interpersonal skills and reflection among the students more than they are making the creativity of the students visible. So, an opportunity is to also make the creativity of the students visible. And the creativity comes from giving students the opportunity to use their life world as a resource for the digital storytelling assignments in class. There are also some serious threats. The first threat is the commuting of teachers. The commuting of teachers influence the continuity of the school's ICT policy because the schools has mostly remote commuting teachers. This means that there is no certainty that the ICT policy will continue because the next year there might be another teacher, and the year after that there might be another teacher as well. And the most of the teachers from school are not living in Koroni. They are people that are commuting, which means that they have not a lot of knowledge about the life growth in Kuruni. That's my observation. And they don't have all the knowledge about the lingua franca as well that the students are using. So, as an outsider, it's important for these teachers to make an extra effort to use the life role of these students and use the social identity of these students during the storytelling assignments. There is insufficient awareness among the teachers in Koroni that the educational system plays a role in the loss of meaning of coconut cultivation. To conclude my research, I will answer the research question. The cultural reproduction is diminishing within households to achieve mutual understanding and consensus on coconut cultivation. There is mutual understanding and consensus that the coconut cultivation is very useful for the community in Koroni, especially for the agricultural community within Koroni. But before, when the cultural reproduction was not diminishing as much, this positive attitude towards the coconut cultivation was both in the private sphere of the life world and in the public sphere of the life world. But now that the cultural reproduction is diminishing, you see that this mutual understanding and consensus is more in the private sphere of the household. The colonization of the life world occurs more in the social world of the public sphere and less in the private sphere. Digital storytelling can connect the learning content through converging teaching methods and interpersonal skills, creativity, and the reflection of students in digital storytelling teaching methods. This means that the coconut cultivation will be introduced in a very creative way back in the public sphere of the system world of the educational system. My next conclusion is that there is a decrease of learning by doing. The coconut farmers of Koroni had a learning by doing teaching method. But now you see a decrease of transfer of values around school, livelihoods, mobility, and barter. Another thing that occurs is that when I interviewed the coconut farmers, I could observe and also from their perception here that there were mostly male coconut farmers. But when I analyzed the poems of the students and did some other interviews, I could distinguish that the current transfer of coconut cultivation goes through female family members, which means that the cultural reproduction of the coconut life world is now more in the private sphere of the life world, where you see that more female family members are dominant, and therefore you see that the transfer of certain values of the coconut cultivation is now more dominant and more transferring more dominantly through the female family members. Another conclusion is that there is an increase of learning by seeing through the education system. Education has already eroded through natural selection in students with higher social economic status, which means that the students that had a higher socio-economic status in Koroni, they left for better educational opportunities somewhere else in the country or abroad. Secondly, education also eroded by starting to select the women, those students with a higher grade, so female students, students with a higher grade, and the younger students in households, which means that systematically the livelihood of the coconut farmers was deprived of workers. And the saddest part is that educated members of the community did not want to work anymore within the coconut cultivation. So, therefore, systematically, education eroded the livelihood of the coconut farmers by natural selection. I recommend for cultural preservation and consensus that the school initiates dialogue with the community and maybe even initiates day trips to the community. It would also be beneficial if the school initiates a communication plan with digital storytelling, where they take both converging and divergent teaching methods into account. For further research, I would love to expand to longitudinal research on the usage of cultural capital, in particular, language of students, and ICT skills in schools. I thank you for your attention.